GAJA was founded way back in 1859 and is certainly one of the oldest wineries in the Barbaresco DOCG. Angelo GAJA, the fourth generation, took over back in 1961 when he was only 21 years old. GAJA has been known for its innovation, particularly since Angelo took over. In the 1960s, for example, Angelo GAJA, along with Bruno Giacosa, was one of the first producers to start bottling and releasing a single vineyard wine. GAJA's first single vineyard bottling was from the Sori vineyard, and it was for the 1967 vintage, which was released in 1970. In the late 1970s, GAJA was also one of the very first producers in Barbaresco to utilize French oak barriques that are only around 225 liters to mature the Barbaresco wines rather than the customary old Slavonian oak casks that had been used for generations. Controversially, back in 1996, GAJA also withdrew its single vineyard Barbarescos, such as Sori San Lorenzo and Sori Tilden, from the Barbaresco DOCG classification, and instead labeled those wines with the much less prestigious Langhe DOC designation. This was reportedly due to the fact that GAJA was unhappy that many people began referring to their flagship Barbaresco as either basic or normale, and GAJA did not want to be known as producing anything that was just regular or basic. This change also allowed GAJA to include small percentages of Barbera in these single vineyard Barbaresco wines, and that obviously would have been prohibited if they were labeling them as Barbaresco DOCG wines, since Barbaresco DOCG has to be 100% Nebbiolo. About 10 to 12 years ago, however, GAJA stopped labeling these single vineyard wines as Langhe DOC wines and removed the Barbera and once again started labeling them as Barbaresco DOCG wines. The flagship GAJA Barbaresco is produced from fruit that comes from 14 different vineyards. These vineyards span a little bit more than 21 hectares. Vineyards are planted between 250 and 330 meters above sea level, and the vines average an impressive 40 years of age. GAJA uses sustainable farming methods in its vineyards. In the winery, GAJA takes a two-prong attack to the maturation. They use the French oak barriques for the first year of maturation, and then for the second year, they'll revert back to the traditional large Slavonian oak casks. The GAJA Barbaresco typically has around 14% alcohol by volume. The 2020 vintage is on store shelves now, and I've seen it selling for around $260 per bottle, but I also saw some places selling it for well over $300 a bottle, so definitely shop around for this one. One of my best all-time experiences with the GAJA Barbaresco was with the legendary 1964 bottling. Despite its age, this bottle was still in excellent condition and showing extremely well. While I hear some people complain that GAJA is overpriced and overrated, in my view, I think these wines typically just need a substantial amount of time to distinguish themselves and show their best. In many instances, 25 years or more. So for that reason, I typically don't buy them on release, but will instead look for back vintages that I can get good deals on here and there. This approach also tends to work quite well because historic pricing was much lower than current release pricing, and so it's often possible to get some back vintages of GAJA Barbaresco with a substantial amount of age on it for not much more than you'll spend for a much more recent release. If it makes you happy to drink GAJA Barbaresco on release or within a few years thereafter, by all means do it. But in my view, I think if you're going to open it within the first 5 to 7 years after the release, you're definitely better off buying something like a Prototoriedal Barbaresco that sells for a fraction of the cost and which doesn't require decades before it reaches its peak. As mentioned, about 10 to 12 years ago, GAJA also began producing single vineyard Barbarescos again, and it has 3 of them: Sori San Lorenzo, Sori Tilden, and Costa Russi. These will typically set you back at least $800 per bottle, if not more. GAJA did not produce any of the single vineyard Barbarescos in 2019 because these vineyards were still suffering from repercussions from a hailstorm that occurred in 2018. As with the flagship GAJA Barbaresco, it's often possible to buy back vintages of the single vineyard Barbarescos for much less than the current pricing. This is also a good idea because these single vineyard Barbarescos require even more age than the flagship Barbaresco. Last year, for example, I tasted the 2000 GAJA San Lorenzo, and it was absolutely incredible, but it was also still very youthful and nowhere near its peak. In fact, I would guess it would probably take another 10 years or so before it would reach its apex. So you'll definitely need a lot of patience if you want to buy one of these single vineyard Barbarescos on release and enjoy it at its peak. If you'd like to learn more about Italian wines, I've published numerous videos on various Italian wine subjects, including Super Tuscan wines, Barolo, Brunello, Chianti Classico, and many more. So if you'd like to check those out, be sure to check out the playlist that's linked above.